Hi, my name is Sara Winick, and today I'm joined by Leona Godin for this edition of Brown Bag Lit's Lattes and Lit. In today's interview, I'll be talking with Leona, who is a writer, performer, speaker, and editor. To get more interviews and content like Lattes and Lit, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button below and click the link in the bio to get more events and information from Brown Bag. So, Leona, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for asking me today, Sarah. Thanks.
Yeah, so my first question is I would just love it if you could just tell me a little bit about how you got into writing and kind of how you, I guess, got to the point where you are today.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's a long story, but I was trained as an academic, so I got my PhD in English literature while I was doing, and that's at NYU in New York City. And
Hmm.
while I was supposed to be writing my dissertation, I got a dissertation grant, and I have to say it was a little bit too much time on my hands, and I started moonlighting as a performance artist in the sort of downtown Lower East Side performance scene. Um, and I kind of fell into that, and through that I wrote some plays. And
Hmm.
at some point I decided that I really wanted to throw myself completely into writing. So I always thought that I was going to be a writer of some sort. I've always written short stories and poems here and there, but um, at some point I began to submit articles and pieces and to become sort of a professional writer. And uh, I one of the things that I applied to over the years is that Catapult had a column for a while there before they kind of shuttered their personal essay part of what they do.
Yeah.
And I wrote a blind writer's notebook, and that really became my book. Their Plant Eyes is kind of a culmination. I would say that the style developed over the course of that column. Um, but what went into the book, which is really like 3,000 years of, a very humble project of like 3,000 years of blindness in Western culture, came out of both my performance life, my academic life, and my writing life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that leads into my next question. I was going to ask specifically about, so in your book, Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness, you go through the history and common conceptions and misconceptions of blindness, as well as your own experience of vision loss from a very young age. When you factor, like you said, done so much performance art, writing, acting, all these different things. How does your own experiences influence your writing style? And has the style
Mm.
changed or evolved since you started writing? Is it something that's continuously growing?
Yeah, I would say that I started out a little bit performative. I have to say that some of the first stories I wrote in, I guess, when I first started submitting stories, had a kind of a monologue feel to them. I think because it was coming out of theater. Um, I had to really work at craft. I didn't do
Yeah.
my MFA or anything like that, but I've since taken a number of classes at Catapult and at a public space and all kinds of places to kind of hone my craft in terms of creating scenes and things like that. Um, I think my favorite quote that I got from Electric Lit was something like, remember that we are bodies in space. And I was like, oh, that's a good one. So that has really changed, I would say, even since since writing Their Plant Eyes, which is really a mixture of me kind of not a mixture, but I would say it's not a memoir, but I very much, my voice is very present in kind of um, helping people to understand how to think about these really large and ingrained topics from a new perspective. So I'm very much there as a voice, but it's not a narrative style that is sort of within the realm of storytelling. So that's something that I've really worked on, I would say, in the last 4 years or so, to create a narrative flow that is perhaps more literary than academic or journalistic.
Yeah, and I think a big part also of the writing process, at least when you're putting it out into the world, is then the feedback you're also getting from editors and publishers. Your writing has been kind of, I think to say like a little bit of everywhere. You have your own book, but you also have writing in the New York Times, Playboy, Electric Literature, and your own online magazine. So in your experiences in those different publishing settings, those different kinds of writing, whether it's, an article or narrative, what's something about the publishing process that took you by surprise? Did they greatly vary from each other? Were they kind of more similar than you thought they would
Um,
be? Anything like that?
that is so interesting. I think my first experience with a big publisher was actually Oprah magazine. And I
Hmm.
think that that was the first moment that I was like, wow, this is so, for a, what I, gosh, I think it was like a 300-word piece or something like that. I mean, the editing process was really extensive, obviously, because they are a big glossy magazine, print
Yeah.
magazine. That was my first experience, which was very intense. Now, on the other, and that took quite a, gosh, I think it was over a couple of months or so. And then on the other hand, my most recent op-ed for New York Times, it's so quick.
Yes.
And perhaps that's the most surprising thing. I mean, it wasn't the last one, it was actually the first one. Helen Keller and the Problem of Inspiration Porn. And I there was some changes that were made literally like half an hour before it published online. And there was a couple of mistakes actually that I'm going to throw blame here. There was actually an editor mistake, and but whatever, when it hits Twitter, it's all you as the author, so
Yeah.
um but that was incredibly surprising. Of course, then we had the opportunity to fix everything for the print edition and stuff, but that like 24-hour news cycle, I don't think I've ever experienced it quite so viscerally as that time, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in school, I'm studying journalism, and it really is amazing how quick the turnaround process is for
Oh my
articles, but also just
goodness.
how many people look at it in that very short span of
Yes,
time, like you
that is a
said.
very good point too. I mean, I think that there's a whole sort of cabal of editors
Yes.
all putting their opinions into it at a very late stage in the game. That was extremely surprising. I will say that as an editor myself for Aromatica Poetica, I am kind of the opposite. I really, maybe it's laziness, but it's also this feeling that we've published people from all over the world, writers from all over the world, and I kind of like the everything. I'm
Yes.
like, absolutely. And if one article has English, British spelling, so be it. If another one, has I have no problem with different styles, is what I'm trying to say. I allow for everything, and I really like that complication in one place, right? That there's going to be different kinds of styles. So I'm sort of the opposite in that way.
Yeah, I don't think it's laziness at all. I mean, like you said, there's so many different styles. I think in like journalism and at least like in the US with AP style, it can be like very conforming. But writing in itself is a very creative outlet. And I think that having those different styles can, if you squash that too much, takes away from the meat of what you're trying to get out. So I hear you. Definitely I see what you're saying with that.
And just to add on to that, I mean, we are all about inclusivity at Aromatica Poetica. And so I think that that's part of it too, right? Is that if
Yes.
you are too nitpicky about styles, it can be very alienating. And we love to be sort of, first time publishers of authors. We've published many very seasoned authors, but we also publish brand new authors. And I think it can be very alienating if you get too nitpicky on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you already touched on this a little bit, but if it's not too redundant, I want to just go back to your experience with performance art. As somebody, you had both the experience of putting words on paper and then being the person to embody those words or those actions. So how is your experience both on the side of kind of the filmmaking process or theater process, and then on the side of the writing process? Do they connect? Do they influence each other? Has it been, I guess, what's that
Yeah.
experience like, kind of knowing both sides?
Yeah, I would say that probably right now I'm wedding the two sides in a way that I've never done before. I'm working on another one-woman show. This one's going to be much more
Hmm.
sort of storytelling. Um, when I wrote my first solo show, it was more theatrical, I would say. So in other words, acting out as opposed to sort of telling a story in more of a, moth kind of way. And I always joked that for that first solo show that was inspired by Helen Keller's time performing in vaudeville. She did actually
Yes.
perform in vaudeville for 4 years, 1920 to 24, and she liked it. Um, that I was not the best actor, but just the cheapest I could find. So I would say, although I've done some acting, I'm not a great actor, and that's really why I'm turning more to storytelling for this next project. But I think the most important thing in terms of difference, again, is that scene setting, right? Because so much of how I created a scene in the theater was, using multimedia, working with other people. I had kind of a vision of what I wanted the set to look like. Even though I'm a blind person, I still think of myself as a very visual person. So I really had a lot of ideas about how I wanted to use multimedia and things like that. And involving other people, of course, is a big thing in theater and film. So that your vision is both bigger than your own ideas and also sort of limited, because you only have so much control, right? At some level, you have to trust the people that you've enlisted to work with you. So I think that is perhaps the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like you said, like the trust is a big part of it. It's a collaborative process, which can be scary, I'd imagine, but also can produce something really beautiful, like it has for you. I also wanted to ask, you wrote this really fantastic piece for the New York Times called "Is That Ableist? Good Question?" And it does a really great job of delving into the complexities of ableism in and out of disabled communities. As time has gone on, progress has undoubtedly been made, as you noted, but there's still a very long way to go in multiple different realms of, studying ableism in disabled communities, outside of disabled communities. In the realm of literature and education specifically, what do you feel is the most important part or multiple parts of that process of destigmatizing disabilities, and for the next generation and current generations to kind of take a new look at those issues?
Well, Sarah, that is a very big question. And
Sorry.
no, I love it. I love it. Like, I think I try and tackle that in all these different ways, basically every day. And I'm still absolutely figuring it out as, I think that's the simple answer. I think that in that article, what I really wanted to put pressure on is the idea that it's okay to be wrong, right? And to admit that things are changing. I think especially for older generations, but it can be true for younger generations too. You get used to saying certain things. You get used to thinking in a certain way. And one of the beautiful things about our changing ideas about identity is that we're all probably going to be a little bit wrong, right? About identities that we don't know anything about. And there's a humbling process in realizing that wrongness and letting go. No matter how liberal and progressive thinking that we are, we're going to be wrong, and it's okay, and it's okay on both sides, right? Like, not shaming people for getting things wrong is also important, and being able to be willing to change is also important. So I think from both sides, a kind of a humility and a gentleness in terms of how complicated and beautiful things can be when we really allow identities to flourish in all their dynamism and diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that that like ability that it's okay to be wrong is something that I feel like is so important to emphasize. I feel like especially in my own educational experience going to college and at my own like student newspaper, like that ability to kind of sit down and be like, we were wrong here, but not to just give up when you're wrong, but to say, I was wrong, we have to fix it going forward. I feel like that's such an important part of this, destigmatization, and you put it very beautifully. And my last question is, I've kind of jumped all over the place. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on? Can be about your own experiences or can be about your own writing, performing, that just I didn't ask you?
My goodness, well, these have been great questions. I would say that I would love to talk about Aromatica Poetica, my magazine, because it is a place that I created sort of not specifically for blind writers and readers, but it's a place that's welcoming to all kinds of writers and readers that are interested in talking about these sort of lesser thought about senses, smell and taste. And I've thought about this a lot, and how sort of one of the buzzwords, I guess, from my book, Their Plant Eyes, is ocular centrism. And I think that, yes, it's an unconscious bias that affects blind people, but it also affects everybody's interests, right? When we, as scientists, as literary folk, as everybody, when we put so much pressure on the visual world, that is also ocular centrism. And so Aromatica Poetica was a place for me to put pressure on smell and taste, and really open up the possibilities of that in very much an, you know, I can't say we're anti-ocular centric because people are always telling me how beautiful the magazine looks, but I would say in appreciating the multi-sensory in literature and in the arts. And so we're opening up for submissions tomorrow. So I just wanted to get that plug in there.
Absolutely. And we can link that down below into the description. And like you said, also, I mean, senses are such an important, like essential part of art, like you said, of writing, even if it's something that can be spoken, read, performed, whatever you, it's all very essential part of that experience. So it's great that you're really able to emphasize it. And it's been, I got to check out the website for myself, and it's amazing.
Yay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I truly appreciate it. Like I said, we'll have Aromatica linked in the description below. And thank you so much for taking the
Oh
time to
my
talk with
goodness,
us.
it's been a pleasure, Sarah. Thank you.
Yes.